picture a tight, tense, twisting shape. It's
Okay.
glowing with this dark, almost metallic sheen.
Right.
It looks muscular, like a torso twisting in the shadows. Or maybe some ancient, heavy piece of bronze machinery completely folded in on itself. But listen to me carefully. This is not a pepper. What you are looking at isn't an object anymore.
It's entirely stripped of its identity.
Exactly. And that visual shock, that exact moment where your brain just kind of stalls out and refuses to name what it's looking at, that is our entire mission today.
Yeah.
We are pulling from a really fascinating article published over on SanalSergi.com to figure out how one man completely rewired the way human beings see reality.
He really did.
Because, as we were putting together this deep dive, which is actually part of the SanalSergi Photography History podcast series, reading through their archives made me realize that Edward Weston didn't just change photography in the 1920s and 30s. He changed the physical act of looking.
What's fascinating here is that to understand what Weston achieved, you have to understand the rule he was breaking. Photography's oldest, most deeply ingrained reflex is to act as evidence. Right from its invention, it was a tool to prove something exists.
Like a receipt for reality.
Exactly. You point the lens at a building, the photograph says, this building was here. You point it at a person, it says this person lived. It's a literal agreement we made with the camera.
And he just ignores that.
Weston completely broke that agreement. He shattered it. In his hands, a photograph is no longer proof of an object.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when I look at his most famous image, Pepper No.30, which he shot in 1930, I see that broken agreement perfectly.
Yeah, that's the ultimate example.
And the SanalSergi article makes this brilliant point that he didn't actually photograph a vegetable. He removed the object entirely.
Right, by isolating it.
Yeah, isolating this bell pepper, he created a pure sculptural form. And the best way I can think to describe how this feels to you as a viewer, think about when you take a really familiar word like door, and you just say it out loud over and over again. Door, door, door.
The psychological term for that is semantic satiation. The brain just gets tired of processing the meaning.
Semantic satiation.
Right.
Eventually, it completely loses its meaning. It stops being a piece of wood on hinges and just becomes this really weird, hollow sound vibrating in your mouth.
Yeah.
Weston does exactly this, but he does it visually. He forces you to look at a bell pepper so intensely that the word pepper just dissolves.
And achieving that visual semantic satiation requires an immense amount of control.
Oh, I bet.
Because in Pepper No.30, the object is reduced to nothing more than a carrier form. When you look at that image, there is no background to give you context.
None at all. It's just black.
Right. There is no scale to tell you how big it is. There is no sense of time. What you are left with is just volumetric density.
Volumetric density, I like that.
There's an internal tension in those curves that feels incredibly heavy. It's like a torsion structure pressing inward and outward at the same time. But creating that density wasn't just a matter of pointing a camera at a vegetable on a cutting board.
Well, I was going to ask about that, because we throw around terms like volumetric density, but for someone trying to picture this on a flat piece of paper, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
How did he physically force a hollow vegetable to look like a 50-pound piece of cast bronze? I read that he was using a massive, large-format camera, like the kind with the accordion bellows.
He was using an 8x10 field camera, which means the actual film negative he was exposing was 8 inches by 10 inches.
Basically the size of a piece of notebook paper.
Exactly. And he wasn't enlarging these photos in a darkroom later. He was making contact prints, meaning he laid the massive negative directly onto the photographic paper.
So the print is a 1-to-1 ratio.
The resulting image is exactly the size of the negative. Because there's no enlargement, there's absolutely zero loss of resolution.
Wow.
The detail is infinite, but the real secret to that density was his lighting setup.
See, I always assumed he had some elaborate studio lighting, like a spotlight in a pitch-black room forcing the shape out of the paper.
It was much stranger than that. To shoot Pepper No.30, he actually placed the pepper inside a large tin funnel.
Wait, like an actual metal funnel you'd use in a garage?
An actual tin funnel. He placed the pepper inside the wide mouth of the funnel. By doing this, the ambient light from his window was catching the metallic sides of the funnel and bouncing back up around the base of the pepper.
Oh, that's wild.
It created this glowing ambient pressure from below that completely separated the pepper from the darkness behind it. And because he was using a very small aperture on his lens to make sure every single millimeter of the pepper was in razor-sharp focus.
which means less light gets in.
Exactly. The lens let in very little light.
So the exposure time must have been ridiculous.
We are talking about exposure times of 4 to 6 hours for a single photograph.
You're kidding. 4 to 6 hours.
Just letting the light slowly bake onto the film.
That completely changes how I view the image. He isn't just capturing a fraction of a second. He is compressing 6 hours of shifting daylight into a single frame.
Yeah.
That's why it has that heavy, dense, volumetric feel. The film is soaking up time itself.
That's a great way to put it.
Which brings us to the obvious question. So what does this all mean? If it's not a pepper anymore, and we've successfully stripped away the vegetableness of it, what is the story he's trying to tell us?
That is the brilliance of his shift toward pure form. There is no story.
None.
There is no symbol. The meaning is the organization of the shape. When you look at other pieces from that era, like his nautilus shell from 1927 or the cabbage leaf from 1931.
Both stunning images, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. But you realize he isn't trying to tell you a narrative about the ocean or about rural farm life. The structural tension itself is the meaning. Take the nautilus shell. It's just a mathematical spiral of expanding energy.
Right.
Or the cabbage leaf, which is just a series of rhythmic, repeating folds.
Well, it's almost musical. You don't just, look at these images and walk away. Your eye is physically forced to travel through the structures.
Yeah, it guides you.
When I look at an 8x10 print of that cabbage leaf, my eye gets caught in the grooves. I have to follow the wave of the leaf from the top edge down into the dark shadows. It's like the surface of the leaf breaking the light actually becomes infinitely more important than the content of the leaf itself.
You are touching on a major rebellion in art history there. Before Weston and his peers formed a movement known as Group F64, the prevailing style in fine art photography was called pictorialism.
Which was very different.
Completely different. Photographers in the 1910s and early 20s were desperately trying to make their photos look like paintings. They would smear Vaseline on their lenses. They would scratch the negatives.
Seriously.
Vaseline.
Yeah, they wanted everything to look fuzzy, romantic, and heavily narrative.
Because they thought that's what made it art.
Precisely. They thought a machine couldn't make art unless a human hand dirtied it up to look like an impressionist painting.
That's so funny to think about now. Right. But Weston rejected that entirely. He argued that the camera's greatest strength is its ability to capture absolute, unvarnished reality with a precision the human eye cannot even fathom.
The infinite depth of field, the razor-sharp focus.
Exactly. He used the machine's mechanical perfection to force you into confronting the raw structure of the world. The meaning is not in what you are looking at, but in how your eye moves across it. It's not a picture of a leaf. It's a physical experience of rhythm.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Ah.
Because applying that philosophy to a cabbage is one thing. A cabbage doesn't have an ego.
True.
Where this philosophy gets incredibly disruptive is when Weston applies this radical equalization to the human body.
Ah, yes.
Think about how we take photos today. You
Yep.
take a picture of a friend and their face is cropped out. You delete it. It's a bad photo. Because we are fundamentally obsessed with identity. We want the face, we want the smile, we want the story.
We crave the psychological connection.
Exactly. But when you look at his Nude Mexico series from 1925, Weston is doing the exact opposite. He actively, intentionally crops out the face, the head, and any identifying features.
He practically decapitates the subject in the frame.
Yeah, but not in a violent way, in this strangely neutralizing way. The human body is completely stripped of narrative.
He strips away the identity to reveal the architecture, and this is why these images are fundamentally not erotic.
Right.
Eroticism, by definition, requires identity. It requires a gaze and acknowledgement between the viewer and the subject. There has to be a psychological relationship.
And he just removes all of that.
Weston eliminates all of it.
Yeah.
His bodies become anonymous landscapes, a spine becomes a mountainous ridge, the curve of a back becomes a wave in the ocean.
It's almost unsettling how successful he is at that.
Yeah.
We are so hardwired as humans to look for faces, to look for that human connection, and he just denies it.
Completely.
But from a purely technical standpoint, how do you make human flesh look like a rock or a shell? I mean, skin has pores, it has blemishes, it has texture that screams human being.
To achieve that landscape effect, he had to suppress the micro details of the individual. Again, this comes down to his mastery of the medium. Sometimes he used orthochromatic film.
Which is what exactly?
It's a type of film highly sensitive to blue light, but blind to red light. It can render skin tones in a way that smooths out certain imperfections while dramatically darkening others.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it creates a much more sculptural, less fleshy look. He also used incredibly deliberate, directional, natural light. He wasn't blasting the model with bright studio flashes.
He was letting shadows pool in the curves of the body, just like they pooled in the curves of his peppers.
Precisely.
He gives human flesh the exact same visual status as a seashell.
He democratizes the visual world. A human is not more important than a pepper in Weston's universe.
Wow.
They are both just raw material for form. Detail brings back the individual, and the individual brings back the story. He only wants the sweeping architecture.
I want to talk more about those shadows, because I used to think he used light like a chisel. Just carving out the bright spots from a dark room.
Right, that's the common assumption.
But looking at these prints, especially the shell photograph from 1927, it feels completely different. It feels more like a topographical map. It's almost like the shadows are physically crushing the object from the outside in.
That is a much more accurate way to look at it. He isn't just illuminating the subject. He is using the darkness as a physical force.
Yeah.
For Weston, the dark areas, the deep shadows inside the curves of that nautilus shell, those aren't just empty space or a lack of light.
They feel incredibly heavy, like negative space that has mass.
They are active structural tools. The shadows compress the form, they push inward, while the bright highlights push the volume outward. The transition between the light and the dark, the gradient, is what creates the physical weight of the image.
Without it, the whole thing falls flat.
Exactly. The light forces the geometry to exist. Without his specific, deliberate use of shadows to crush the edges of the shell, the form simply isn't there. It would just be a flat, white spiral.
When you talk about that pressure from the shadows forcing the geometry to exist, it makes me realize how incredibly lazy my own eyes are most of the time.
The human brain is essentially an efficiency machine. It is designed to be visually lazy.
Which is perfectly illustrated by another piece from the SanalSergi article, Artichoke Halved from 1930.
Oh, that's a brilliant image.
When I first looked at that image, my brain tried to categorize it as a flower and maybe some sort of Gothic architecture. It took me a full 10 seconds to realize it was food.
Yeah.
That delay, that 10-second gap where your brain is glitching and trying to figure out what it's looking at, that feels like the exact space where Weston's art actually happens.
That 10-second gap is precisely what he was engineering. Because as an efficiency machine, your brain wants to quickly label things so it can move on to the next potential threat or reward in your environment.
Right, it's a survival thing.
You see a shape, your brain says, that's an artichoke. And you immediately stop looking at it. Recognizing is fast, it's categorical, and it stops the act of seeing dead in its tracks.
Think about that for a second. Think about how much of your daily life is spent just recognizing your surroundings without truly seeing them.
Most of it.
You recognize your steering wheel, your coffee cup, your laptop keyboard. You don't see them. You just acknowledge their label and move on.
But Weston sabotages that lazy reflex. In Artichoke Halved, he doesn't just rely on light to break your perception, he physically cuts the object in half.
Yeah, straight down the middle.
He destroys its recognizable exterior silhouette. He frames it so tightly that there is no plate, no table, no context.
Your brain tries to say artichoke, but the image is so intensely geometric, the contrast is so sharp that the label just falls off. You are forced to actually look at the relationships in front of you, the way the leaves stack like armored scales, the way the light hits the jagged edges.
He forces you into a state of slow seeing. It's a completely different cognitive process. You are no longer referencing a stored memory of an artichoke. You are experiencing the absolute visual reality of that specific structure, in that specific light, in that specific moment.
And what's wild is that he didn't just stay in the controlled environment of his studio to do this. He took this exact same obsessive form-hunting lens out into the chaotic real world.
He did. He hauled his massive 8x10 wooden field camera, his heavy wooden tripod, and his fragile glass plates out to the jagged cliffs of the California coast.
That sounds exhausting.
It was. But he took this philosophy to nature with his work like Eroded Rock, Point Lobos, and his famous Kelp series. And what he does to nature is fascinating.
Because it's usually so romanticized, right?
Exactly. Nature is usually heavily romanticized in photography. The grand landscape, the sublime beauty, the emotional sunset. Weston doesn't care about any of that.
He looks at an eroded rock on a beach and treats it identically to a piece of modernist architecture. It's just raw material for abstract structure.
Exactly. He frames a piece of dried, twisted kelp on the sand with the exact same monumental density as he framed the pepper in the tin funnel.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
Because if a human body a giant eroded rock on the California coast, and a bell pepper from the grocery store are all just flattened in the forms? Do we lose something?
That's the big question.
Doesn't flattening the hierarchy of the entire world make the art a bit, I don't know, empty? If there's no story connecting us to the subject, isn't it just a really pretty geometric pattern?
That is the most essential critique of his work, and you've hit on the ultimate modernist dilemma. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this absolute purity of form, this philosophy of formalism, is Weston's greatest triumph, but it is undeniably his greatest risk.
So?
Well, by isolating the form so perfectly, he creates an incredibly powerful aesthetic experience. But without context, without narrative, without a story connecting us to the messy realities of the human condition, the meaning of the image becomes incredibly fragile.
Ah, I see. It puts all the pressure on the viewer. If I don't actively engage with the geometry, there's nothing else to hold on to.
It relies entirely on the viewer's willingness to cross that threshold into slow seeing. If a viewer looks at his eroded rock and just shrugs and says, okay, it's a nice picture of a rock, the entire system fails.
Right.
The absolute reliance on form means the photograph refuses to hold your hand. It won't tell you how to feel. It won't give you a moral lesson or a sentimental narrative. And for some critics of formalism, that makes the work feel cold or detached from the socio-political realities of life.
It's like a high wire act without a net.
Yeah.
He's betting his entire legacy on the idea that the geometry of the universe is compelling enough on its own, without us needing to attach a fairy tale or a human ego to it.
And when it works, when you actually allow your brain to glitch for those 10 seconds and cross that threshold from recognizing to seeing, it is deeply profound.
Yeah.
Because you suddenly realize the world is built on these repeating, rhyming structures. The curve of a nautilus shell is the exact same curve as a human spine, which is the exact same curve as a dying leaf.
It changes you. Once you see the muscular torsion in a pepper, you can't unsee it. The world stops being a collection of labeled items and starts being a collection of forces and tensions.
Exactly.
So I want to leave you with a challenge today. I want you to pick up a totally mundane object in your house right now. Your coffee mug, crumpled up piece of paper on your desk, whatever's closest to you.
Yeah, try it out.
And just stare at it. Try to actively strip away its name. Stop calling it a mug. Stop thinking about the coffee inside it. Look at the way the light from the window hits the curve of the ceramic. Look at the topographical map of the shadow it casts on the desk. Experience the world, just for 60 seconds, the exact way Edward Weston did.
Photography does not need to show something. Sometimes form alone is enough.
That is the perfect distillation of everything we've talked about today. Just a quick reminder that this deep dive was prepared as part of the SanalSergi Photography History Podcast series. If you want to actually see that muscular tension in Pepper No.30, or get lost in the infinite mathematical spiral of the nautilus shell, we warmly invite you to visit SanalSergi.com to explore these images and discover even more incredible visual history. Until next time, take a second to stop recognizing and start seeing.